We are the Historical Archives. Subscribe for more stories and drop the code in the comments if you spot it in the video. This photograph from late 19th century Brazil portrays the complex, often conflicted bonds between enslaved women and the children of their owners. Enslaved women frequently served as caregivers, providing crucial emotional and physical care to these children, who sometimes saw them as maternal figures. Yet this bond was complicated by the harsh reality of ownership, as enslaved women were seen as property rather than family members. This photograph captures a significant moment during the British Navy's efforts to combat the transatlantic slave trade. The British sailors' act of removing leg irons from a Swahili man symbolizes the British Royal Navy's role in intercepting slave ships in the Indian Ocean. Their consistent patrols not only rescued individuals trapped in slavery, but also stood as a powerful symbol of resistance against human trafficking. This striking 1862 photograph reveals enslaved workers on J.J. Smith's cotton plantation in South Carolina, emblematic of the Southern economy's dependence on slavery. Cotton production, driven by forced labor, accounted for over half of U.S. exports by the mid-19th century, underscoring its role in both domestic prosperity and global trade. The scene reflects not only the economic significance of plantations, but also the human cost. This reflection of forced labor wasn't confined to the American South. In 1863, Cuba's sugar and tobacco plantations, integral to its economy, heavily relied on the exploitation of enslaved laborers, despite the rise of abolitionist movements worldwide. This rare photograph offers a glimpse into the brief moments of rest for these workers, who endured grueling conditions under the Caribbean sun. In 1864, Atlanta, Georgia, was home to a thriving slave market, where African Americans were sold and treated as property, enduring the trauma of family separations and dehumanization. These markets symbolized the economic dependence on slavery in the South. However, the Union Army's capture of Atlanta during the Civil War led to the destruction of many such markets, marking a turning point. As Atlanta's slave market crumbled, the rise of organizations like the Ku Klux Klan would shape the post-war South in troubling ways. The Ku Klux Klan's gesture of gifting a radio to Jack Riddle, a former slave, serves as an example of how such groups tried to soften their public image. Despite the Klan's violent history and white supremacist ideology, actions like this were used to project a more benevolent facade, potentially obscuring their intentions. This gift likely aimed to humanize the organization and make their image more palatable to the public. This 1865 photograph offers a stark depiction of Brazil's entrenched slave system, showcasing a rural man carried through Bahia's streets by two enslaved individuals. This practice, common among the elite, underscored the dehumanizing reliance on enslaved labor for daily conveniences. As the last nation in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888, Brazil resisted growing global abolitionist pressures, with slavery remaining central to its economy and social hierarchy. Even as Brazil resisted the end of slavery, the broader international community, including Britain, was taking action to dismantle these networks and provide freedom to the enslaved. The HMS Daphne's 1868 rescue of over 100 enslaved individuals highlights Britain's post-abolition efforts to combat slavery on a global scale. Freed from Arab slave traders in the Indian Ocean, these men, women, and children bore visible scars of their brutal captivity. The operation was part of Britain's broader anti-slavery mission following its 1833 Abolition Act, with the Royal Navy actively intercepting slave ships along trafficking routes. During the Civil War, many formerly enslaved black men enlisted in the Union Army, becoming a critical force in its success. The soldiers in this photograph symbolize their bravery and determination to fight for freedom. Despite their contributions, racial inequality persisted, with black soldiers initially receiving lower wages than their white counterparts. It wasn't until 1864, after tireless efforts and protests, that Congress passed legislation ensuring equal pay. As black men in the Union Army fought for their rights, former slaves in Brazil faced a different but equally challenging path to freedom. In Brazil's Paraíba Valley, the transition from slavery to freedom was marked by former slaves continuing to work on coffee plantations, striving for stability in the shadow of the country's exploitative past. Coffee dominated Brazil's economy in the 19th century, with over 1 million enslaved individuals driving its cultivation and export. Jonathan Walker, famously known as the Man with the Marked Hand, became a symbol of abolitionist bravery in 1844. While attempting to aid 7 enslaved individuals in their escape to freedom, Walker was captured, tried, and sentenced. As punishment, his hand was branded with SS for slave stealer, a mark meant to shame him but which instead highlighted his unwavering commitment to justice. Rather than silencing Jonathan Walker, the branding of his hand transformed him into an enduring emblem of resistance against slavery. The photograph taken after his punishment prominently displayed the scar, symbolizing his steadfast dedication to the abolitionist cause. The photograph of Gordon, an escaped enslaved man taken in Baton Rouge in 1863, captured the deep scars on his back from brutal whippings and became known as the scourged back. This powerful image played a significant role in the abolitionist movement, exposing the cruelty of slavery and galvanizing public support for emancipation. Gordon's story served as a stark reminder of slavery's cruelty, while other enslaved individuals found brief refuge and a path to freedom during the tumultuous retreat of Confederate forces. This 1862 photograph captures enslaved individuals abandoned by Confederate forces during General Thomas F. Drayton's retreat. Amidst the chaos, they saw a rare opportunity to escape, finding refuge and protection from the advancing Union Army. Harriet Tubman, born into slavery in 1822, escaped in 1849 and became one of the most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad. She made numerous dangerous trips back to the South, helping over 800 enslaved people escape to freedom. Tubman's courage, resourcefulness, and dedication made her a legendary figure in American history. While Tubman's daring missions on the Underground Railroad helped countless individuals escape to freedom, many freed people, such as those in Jamaica, continued to face economic hardship in the aftermath of slavery. After emancipation, many African-descended workers in Jamaica continued to work on sugarcane plantations, despite the abolition of slavery in 1838. While slavery was officially ended, the island's economy remained heavily dependent on sugar exports. The newly freed individuals, lacking alternative sources of income and land, found themselves in cycles of poverty and exploitation. In 1887, Rachel and Jerry Shores, along with other freedmen, settled in Custer County, Nebraska, seeking new opportunities in the West. Despite the hardships of isolation and difficult weather conditions, they managed to establish African American communities, illustrating the resilience of formerly enslaved individuals. The establishment of African American communities in the West by freedmen such as the Shores family stands in sharp contrast to the dehumanizing conditions of slave pens. This 1865 image highlights the interior of a slave pen in Alexandria, Virginia, a pivotal site in the U.S. slave trade. These pens were used to temporarily detain enslaved individuals, often torn from their families, before being sold at auction. This 1860 photograph of Andrew Chandler, a member of the 44th Mississippi Infantry, with Silas Chandler, his former enslaved man, highlights an unusual and poignant bond formed during the Civil War. Silas saved Andrew's life at the Battle of Shiloh, an act of bravery that led Andrew to reward him with land after the war. Silas established a church for his community, marking a dramatic shift in his life from slavery to respect and autonomy. This photograph offers a rare insight into the life of sugarcane workers in late 19th century Jamaica. Despite the abolition of slavery, many descendants of enslaved Africans continued to work on sugar plantations under harsh conditions, often in grueling labor. Even after slavery ended, both in Jamaica and the South, workers found themselves trapped in systems that perpetuated economic hardship and limited opportunities for advancement. In 1898, sharecropping emerged as the dominant labor system in Georgia, replacing slavery in the South. Black workers, many of whom were descendants of enslaved people, farmed land owned by whites in exchange for a share of the crops. While technically free, they faced economic exploitation due to high rents for land, food, and shelter, trapping them in a cycle of poverty. This new system mirrored the injustices of slavery, perpetuating harsh working conditions and limited opportunities for upward mobility. In 1870, Thomas Mundy Peterson made history as the first African American to cast a vote following the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which granted voting rights to all male citizens, regardless of race. His participation in a local election in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, became a powerful symbol of African American political involvement during the Reconstruction era. This moment marked a crucial step forward in the struggle for racial equality and emphasized the growing demand for full civil rights and political representation for African Americans. This haunting image from World War II shows American prisoners who were captured by Japanese forces and subjected to forced labor. Many of these men were made to work on the infamous death railway, where they faced severe malnutrition, disease, and abuse. The conditions were so harsh that nearly 12,000 prisoners perished. This tragic chapter serves as a stark reminder of the cruelty and suffering endured by prisoners during wartime. This 1852 photograph shows enslaved individuals awaiting sale in St. Louis, Missouri, a key hub in the U.S. slave trade. These markets were locations where enslaved people were commodified, inspected, and sold like property. St. Louis, strategically positioned along the Mississippi River, played a crucial role in connecting the South to other regions, facilitating the forced transport of enslaved individuals. This grim reality highlights the dehumanizing system of slavery and the centrality of markets like these in sustaining it. This 19th century photograph depicts an enslaved woman preparing a meal in a cast-iron pot while a child observes. The food, often simple fare like corn, beans, and sweet potatoes, provided sustenance but also served as a link to African cultural traditions. For many enslaved individuals, cooking was not just a practical necessity, but a means of preserving identity and community amidst the dehumanizing conditions of slavery. The bell rack was a brutal device used in Alabama to control enslaved people by preventing escape attempts. Fastened around the neck, it included a metal bar with a bell that would ring if the person moved, alerting owners or overseers. This sound acted as an alarm, making it nearly impossible to move discreetly, especially in areas with dense foliage, and served as a method of constant surveillance and intimidation. This photograph of Africans aboard a slave ship captures the harrowing conditions of the transatlantic slave trade. Overcrowded and deprived of food, water, and basic care, many individuals, often including children, suffered from malnutrition, disease, and mistreatment. Tragically, countless lives were lost during the voyage before reaching the Americas. From the 16th to the 19th centuries, an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly transported, with approximately 2 million dying along the way, illustrating the immense human cost of the slave trade. This image depicts an enslaved man marked with a permanent brand on his forehead and forced to wear a painful collar, designed to prevent him from lying down or resting. These physical markings, along with surrounding tools of punishment, reflect the cruel and dehumanizing conditions that enslaved individuals endured daily. Such instruments were a constant reminder of their status as property, stripping them of dignity and subjecting them to relentless physical and psychological suffering. These brutal practices exemplify the severe exploitation faced by millions during slavery. The image of Aboriginal Australians shackled at Wyndham Prison in 1902 highlights the harsh realities of colonialism and the brutal treatment faced by indigenous peoples. Much like enslaved Africans, they were subjected to dehumanizing policies aimed at civilizing them. These acts of violence and control continue to have lasting effects on their communities, contributing to ongoing struggles for recognition, rights, and cultural preservation in modern Australia. The image captures Villa Americana, a community in Sao Paulo established by former Confederate families who left the United States after the Civil War. This colony left an enduring mark, blending aspects of Southern U.S. culture with Brazilian traditions. Even today, Villa Americana's legacy highlights a unique cultural connection, revealing how historical migrations can subtly shape regional identities across generations. This 2012 photo captures the dilapidated remnants of a slave cabin near the Kahi River in South Carolina, a site of great historical importance. In 1863, Harriet Tubman led a courageous raid here, freeing more than 750 enslaved people with the aid of Union soldiers. Despite the abolition of slavery, this location stands as a lasting reminder of the struggle for freedom and the courage of those who fought for it during the Civil War. Omar ibn Said, a learned scholar from Senegal, was captured during a local conflict and sold into slavery in the United States, where he endured over 50 years of captivity. Despite his harsh circumstances, Omar's intellectual abilities remained strong, and he continued to write religious texts in Arabic. His story stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and provides a rare insight into the experiences of enslaved Africans in America, highlighting both the endurance of knowledge and the tragedy of forced displacement. In 1916, former enslaved individuals gathered in Washington to discuss their past and ongoing struggles. Despite the end of slavery decades earlier, they continued to face the enduring effects of discrimination. Conventions like these provided a platform for families, such as the Shores, to reclaim their narratives and advocate for justice, underscoring the persistence of racial inequality and the lasting impact of slavery on their lives. The 1889 photo of an African-American man being whipped in a U.S. prison serves as a stark reminder of how the prison system perpetuated the exploitation of African Americans after the abolition of slavery. Despite emancipation, many former slaves were subjected to forced labor under minor charges, and physical punishment was commonly used. Anastasia's tragic story highlights the brutal use of the Iron Mask, a device designed to silence and control rebellious enslaved individuals. By obstructing speech and breathing, it inflicted immense physical and psychological suffering. Anastasia's ordeal became a symbol of resistance, illustrating the dehumanizing tactics used to maintain control over the enslaved. Her legacy underscores the necessity of abolition and the fight for human dignity, as it brings to light the enduring struggle for freedom faced by those who resisted oppressive systems. In 1947, 88-year-old Mrs. Sally, a former slave, reflected on the Emancipation Proclamation, which she had experienced as a young child. Despite the freedom it promised, her life, like many others, continued to be marked by the ongoing struggles for equality and civil rights. Her story highlights the complexities of emancipation, showing that while slavery ended, the journey for true freedom and justice was far from complete. Mrs. Sally's life exemplified the enduring hardships African Americans faced, even after the formal abolition of slavery. This 1898 photograph captures Lucy Higgs Nichols, a remarkable former enslaved woman who became the only female member of the Grand Army of the Republic, an organization for Civil War veterans. After escaping to Union lines, Lucy served as a nurse with the 23rd Indiana Infantry Regiment during the war. Her post-war recognition as a member of the Veterans Group was a significant achievement, especially given the racial and gender barriers of the time, marking her as a pioneering figure in the fight for recognition and equality. This photograph from 1910 in Pitt County, North Carolina, illustrates convict laborers used for road construction. Following the Civil War, convict leasing became a widespread system in the South, exploiting primarily African American prisoners for cheap labor. This system effectively continued the legacy of forced labor, with prisoners often incarcerated for minor offenses and subjected to grueling work. Despite the abolition of slavery, practices like convict leasing perpetuated exploitation and inequality in the region. Frederick Douglass, born into slavery in Maryland, escaped and became an influential abolitionist, writer, and speaker. His accomplishments challenged the widespread belief that enslaved individuals lacked intellectual capacity. Douglass also made history as the first African American appointed to a major diplomatic post, serving as U.S. Minister to Haiti, further breaking barriers and demonstrating his impact on American society and the global stage. The 1850 portrait of Renai, a slave from South Carolina, taken by Harvard professor Louis Agassiz, reflects the pseudoscientific racism of the time. Agassiz's promotion of polygenism, which suggested that different races had separate origins and that Africans were inferior, helped rationalize slavery and was a precursor to the racist ideologies later exploited by the Nazis. The image of a Union soldier posing with a freed child highlights the deep personal connections formed during the Civil War. Many Union soldiers not only fought for emancipation but also developed strong bonds with enslaved families they helped escape. These relationships were instrumental in advancing the cause of abolition and equality. In the years following the war, their advocacy continued to shape the push for civil rights, marking a significant shift in American attitudes toward African Americans and their freedoms, extending into the 20th century. In 1838, a reward poster from Bardstown, Kentucky offered $150 for the capture of an escaped slave. These bounty notices were typical in the 19th century, offering financial incentives to find runaway slaves. The $150 reward, a substantial amount for that time, underscored how enslaved people were valued as property. These posters included detailed descriptions to help in the pursuit of those seeking freedom. In 1907, the Royal Navy's HMS Sphinx captured an Arab slave trader off Mozambique, part of ongoing efforts to combat the illicit slave trade in the Indian Ocean. Despite the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, illegal trafficking persisted. The Navy's operations, rescuing enslaved individuals and intercepting traders, underscored the continued commitment to ending slavery's remnants. The 4th United States Colored Infantry was established after President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. This decision allowed African Americans to enlist in the Union Army, bolstering the Union's forces. The proclamation, while freeing enslaved individuals in Confederate territories, also represented a critical shift in both the Civil War and the broader fight for racial equality. The formation of such units marked a turning point, empowering African Americans to actively contribute to the Union's efforts and secure freedom. This 1897 photograph depicts Coley sorting tobacco in a warehouse under the supervision of a Dutch overseer in Indonesia. At this time, Sumatra's tobacco industry played a crucial role in the Dutch colonial economy, fueled by the exploitative labor of workers from China and India. These laborers, often referred to as coolies, faced harsh working conditions, low wages, and systemic inequality. The use of cheap labor was integral to industries like tobacco, highlighting the ongoing impact of colonial exploitation in the region. This 1939 photograph from Marshall, Texas, captures Win Willis, a man who witnessed the transformation from slavery to freedom. Holding a horn used to signal enslaved individuals for their daily tasks, Willis, born in Louisiana in 1822, claimed to be 116 years old at the time. He shared first-hand accounts of his experiences, passed down from his former master, offering valuable insight into the lives of enslaved people and the changes they faced in the decades following emancipation. Sarah Breedlove, known as Madam C.J. Walker, was a groundbreaking entrepreneur and philanthropist. She became the first self-made female millionaire in the U.S., building a successful beauty empire. A daughter of former slaves, Walker used her wealth to support civil rights causes, focusing on education and the empowerment of the African American community. In this 1911 photo, Walker is seen behind the wheel of her new car, symbolizing both her business success and her significant role in advancing African American civil rights. This image shows former slaves dressed in new clothes after being rescued, symbolizing their efforts to reclaim dignity. Many were relocated to British colonies in East Africa, where they were given opportunities to build new lives away from the horrors of slavery. The rehabilitation efforts, alongside the resilience of the freed individuals, reflect both the impact of liberation and the ongoing support for those recovering from the traumatic legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. This 1862 photograph poignantly captures multiple generations of a family born into slavery, offering a snapshot of their enduring struggles. Even with the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, many African Americans did not experience true freedom until the conclusion of the Civil War years later. This image reflects the harsh realities of slavery, as well as the delayed yet eventual liberation that followed the conflict's end. After the Civil War, around 180,000 African Americans served in the Union Army, significantly contributing to the defeat of the Confederacy. However, post-war Southern policies created new forms of forced labor. Laws targeting African Americans with minor offenses like vagrancy were used to incarcerate them, leading to their forced labor under convict leasing. This system, offering free labor for both state-run projects and private businesses, effectively continued economic exploitation and control over black people, despite the formal end of slavery. Rebecca Felton, the last former slave owner to hold a Senate seat, served briefly in 1922. Despite her political position, She was notorious for her vocal advocacy of white supremacy, often endorsing violence to maintain racial control in the South. Her public speeches reflected the deeply entrenched racial prejudices of the time, aligning with the discriminatory views that were pervasive in the post-Reconstruction South. Felton's belief that slavery was beneficial to both white and black people was a common justification used by defenders of the institution. This perspective framed slavery as an economic necessity and attempted to portray it as a system that provided care and structure for enslaved individuals, disregarding their humanity and suffering. Such arguments helped perpetuate the myth that slavery was essential for the South's social and economic order, even after it was abolished. During the Civil War, a group of enslaved people found refuge at the Allen Farm in Yorkville, Virginia. These individuals, known as contrabands, sought safety in Union-held areas after Union military commanders decided not to return runaway slaves to their Confederate owners. This marked a crucial turning point, as it represented a shift in the Union's stance on slavery, offering hope for those seeking freedom and contributing to the larger struggle for liberty during the war. The one-drop rule, which classified anyone with even minimal African ancestry as black, was used in the U.S. to justify slavery and segregation. This rule persisted well into the 20th century, impacting identity and social status. Today, its legacy can still be seen in societal ideas around race, where identity may be perceived through rigid or binary lenses. The photograph of Jesse L. Birch and Frank M. Rockwell flanking an African-American woman, with Birch pointing a gun at her head, serves as a stark reminder of the power dynamics and racial oppression during that era. Such images were often used to reinforce white dominance and intimidate African Americans, perpetuating a system of fear and submission. This powerful image from around 1890 shows a young enslaved in Zanzibar, enduring harsh punishment while forced to hold a heavy log above their head. During this time, Zanzibar was a key center of the Indian Ocean slave trade. Although slavery in Zanzibar was officially abolished in 1897, its legacy of suffering lingered long after, continuing to impact the region's social fabric. In 1904, Samuel Phillips Verner brought a group of Africans to the St. Louis World's Fair, where they were displayed in an exhibit that exploited their physical traits for public fascination. Verner falsely labeled them as pygmies, contributing to the dehumanization of Africans at the fair, where similar exhibits presented them as exotic curiosities for entertainment. This reflects the era's racial prejudices and the colonial mindset, turning human beings into spectacles. The 1888 signing of the Golden Law in Brazil officially abolished slavery, marking a turning point in the nation's history. Princess Isabel, who was the heir to the Brazilian throne, signed the law after years of pressure from abolitionist movements. This made Brazil the last country in the Americas to formally end slavery, culminating in a momentous celebration captured in this image, symbolizing a pivotal shift in the struggle for freedom and equality.